But unlike the other routine analysis, this report was a high-profile product ordered by the president. Oh, Tulsi Gabbard didn't write this report. This was delivered to Congress, and they did nothing about it and said, well, it's all valid to us.
The House Intel report states, quote, contradicting public claims by then CIA Director Brennan that the dossier was not in any way incorporated into this intelligence assessment.
Liar! Tulsi Gabbard drops the mother lode. 46 pages, now approved for release by the Director of National Intelligence. And this comes in conjunction with other reports that we've covered here. She released another massive trove of documents, and Chuck Grassley released a Clinton annex. And now this is just another 46 pages that we can see that are adding fuel to the fire and fueling demands for criminal prosecutions of Obama, Comey, Clapper, and John Brennan. This was originally released, it looks like, September 18, 2020. And it's entitled The Intelligence Community Assessment, the ICA. It's a review of the prior report, Russia's Influence Campaign, targeting the 2016 presidential election. Now, here's what we've got. Why are we doing this study? So what did we need to do to go back to look at the original report? They say the conclusions of the original report was titled this. Okay, the original report, Russian Influence Campaign targeting the 2016 presidential election, saying that raised concerns that Russia was attempting to undermine confidence in U.S. elections. And that's a pretty big statement. So they had to do a comprehensive examination of the original report. Investigators compared the Obama report and their analytic tradecraft. We've got the analytic standards that we have to follow. And so we reviewed. In fact, investigators spent 2,300 hours reviewing their report and its source reports. A lot of time. Mostly at CIA headquarters, mostly in compartmented report vaults and on the outside related research. Now, in addition, 20 interviews were conducted of intelligence officers or FBI agents who were associated with managing or drafting the report and a production of raw reporting cited as sources. Here's what the majority found. Most judgments from the intelligence community on Russia's activity in the U.S. election employed proper analytic tradecraft. So there were some reports about Russia doing things, and those were proper reports, and they were consistent with the observed Russian behaviors. Here's some of the judgments that were actually credible. 1, Putin ordered conventional and cyber influence operations, notably by leaking politically sensitive emails obtained from computer intrusions, right? So there's some involvement of Putin somewhere. And Putin's principal motivations in these operations were to undermine faith in the U.S. democratic process and to weaken what the Russians consider to be an inevitable Clinton presidency. Putin held back as number 3, leaking some of the compromising material because he wanted to use it after the election when he thought Hillary was going to win. So actually, it would have served him if Hillary won because he's got a lot more compromise on her from all of her hacked emails. And so this was not actually something that he wanted Trump to win because he doesn't have the same compromise on Trump. Now, in contrast to the rest of the intelligence community, so everybody's going one way on this, right? Actually kind of thought that Hillary was going to win and was holding back, wasn't doing a lot, but did approve some things, but it was going to be delayed. But in contrast to the rest of the intelligence community, the judgment that Putin developed, quote, a clear preference for candidate Trump and aspired to help his chances of victory did not adhere to the tenets of the analytic standards. Now, the director of the CIA, Brennan, here's what they found. Ordered the post-election publication after the election, like, oh crap, Brennan. He wanted to publish 15 reports containing previously collected but unpublished intelligence, 3 of which were substandard, okay? Now, this guy's just trolling through his closet. He's like, I just need some anything, whatever. Somebody's like, well, Trump said something that sounded Russian one time. He did? What'd he say? Well, I don't know. Oh, that's good enough. Write it down. Containing information that was unclear, uncertain origin, potentially biased, or totally implausible. And those became foundational sources for their judgments. He goes into the garbage and picks out something useful and makes it up. Show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Just like Stalin. The ICA misrepresented these reports as reliable. They lied without mentioning their significant underlying flaws. It's just a fake report. Fraudulent. One scant, unclear, unverifiable fragment of a sentence from one of the substantiated reports constitutes the only classified information cited to suggest Putin, quote, aspired to help Trump win. It's totally meaningless, but they ran with that, right? Trump-Russia collusion. There's a whole song about it. Jake Tapper, before he was on the Biden's Amazing train, he was out there. Trump-Russia collusion. You know the song. The ICA ignored or selectively quoted reliable intelligence reports, just, cherry-picked what they wanted, and in some cases undermined judgments that Putin sought to elect Trump. So they left out the stuff that actually said the opposite of the conclusion conclusion they wanted. Now, they also failed to consider plausible alternative explanations for Putin's intentions that they had actual reliable intelligence about, and when they could match it with observed Russian actions. And so the DCIA, so that's John Brennan, what he did is he picked 5 analysts to write the report. He rushed it through just like they did when they needed talking points for Joe Biden on the debate stage in order to publish 2 weeks before Trump was sworn in to come out and attack him. Hurried coordination and limited access to the draft reduced opportunities for the intelligence community to discover misquoting of sources, okay? Not even appropriately copying and pasting their fake reports and other tradecraft errors. This is the unredacted, fully sourced, limited access investigation report that was drafted and stored in a limited access vault at CIA headquarters, baby. We're looking at the good stuff today. Although the principal findings of this report are identical to the top secret downgraded version prepared for Congress, this is even more advanced than what Congress gets. This version contains significantly more detailed quotations from sensitive reports, to include source descriptions from raw intelligence and extensive footnotes citing raw intelligence reports and interviews of intelligence community officers. And the names of the officers quoted in the main text were omitted, but here's what we found. The bulk of the intelligence community judgments were sound, and they did employ proper analytic tradecraft, right? A lot of it was great. It was good stuff. It was only after Trump won and they had to change everything that it became garbage and fake. The majority found most of these were pretty well reasoned, actually, consistent with observed observations. Russia's efforts to influence 16 represent the most recent expression of their desire to undermine U.S. liberal democratic order. Russian intelligence services, acting on the orders of Putin, launched conventional and cyber influence operations, and notably by leaking politically sensitive emails they were obtained from computer intrusions during the 2016 elections. Now, Putin's principal motivations in these influence operations were to undermine, and it was a long-standing desire to undermine U.S. democracy, not to help Trump, and to weaken from the start what the Russians thought was going to be an inevitable Clinton presidency. So, in fact, Putin, they write specifically, this is intelligence community details that even Tom Cotton sounds like didn't get to see all at the time. Putin held back leaking some compromising material to use against Hillary for later. So I think by logical reasoning, you can say that Putin was helping Clinton. That little detail, it's like, wait a minute. Putin had bad information about Hillary that could have been devastating to her campaign, and he didn't release it because he wanted her in there. That would have been a nice little detail we could have known, back then. Now, the operation of officers at the CIA and the NSA who produced the raw intelligence cited in these reports showed great professionalism. Like, that's pretty good details. In fact, that is probably true, that he did have compromise on Hillary, because everybody does. Now, the CIA collection management officers did an excellent job of employing detailed context statements that spelled out evidentiary problems, and so some of the raw intelligence could be bad. The drafters did not accurately cite the most critical context statements, but original raw reports were nonetheless professionally prepared. All right, so it's all good. Nice job, everybody. Now, these failures were serious enough to call into question judgments that allege that Putin developed a clear preference for candidate Trump. That's what they wrote. There is no evidence of that. And the failures were serious enough to question their judgment. Why did they make the decision? What about their judgment caused them to do that? Oh, they're partisan hacks. They're not interested in doing their jobs and being good stewards of American power. And they aspired to help his chances of victory. Made up. And that Russian leaders never entirely abandoned hope for a defeat of Secretary Clinton. This is unequivocal statements that they had to generate, and they're trying to tie it to fake evidence, as we'll see. Now, the ICA defined these as high confidence judgments based on a body of reporting from, quote, multiple sources. Now, here's the box, Putin's intentions. Here's what they said. They wrote, "We further assess Putin and the Russian government developed a clear preference for Trump. We have, quote, high confidence in these judgments," write the Brennan Comey Clapper hacks. CIA and FBI also assess with high confidence that Putin and the Russian governments aspired to help Trump. No, they did not. They wanted Hillary to win so that they could attack her, saying that when possible, they wanted to discredit Secretary Clinton. And we assess that Russian leaders never abandoned hope for a defeat of Clinton. They wrote this. When it appeared that Clinton was likely to win, their influence began to focus more on undermining her future presidency, which is a careful way of saying that's probably true, right? And that's why they wanted her to win, is because they had the compromise, which they didn't tell us about. Now, the judgments on Putin's intentions that they just shoved in there failed the standards. You wouldn't serve that egg to anybody, okay? It's not done. You have to cook it more. It's like a goopy mess, so continue to cook it. The standards were dropped. And here, the question, of course, is why? They failed to adhere to it because it was intentional. They wanted this to be crap. Here's what they failed to do. Properly describe quality and the credibility of the sources, so they didn't even make the sandwich properly according to the process, properly express and explain uncertainties associated with major analytic judgments. So the report was just failing to even, check the rubric. Base confidence assessments on the quantity and quality source of material. No analysis. Be informed by all relevant information available. Failed that one. They neglected all of the other intelligence that provided an alternative story. They didn't consider any alternative perspectives or contrary information in the report, and they failed to be independent of political considerations because the whole thing was political. So all of that, right? They failed. You didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, you didn't do this, and you're the best in the whole thing. So you just rush this out because you needed a narrative to shove down everyone's throats. Now, despite the significant Tradecraft failures, the assessment demonstrated awareness that the standards in a section, in other words, they knew what they were doing and they ignored it. They say a critical part of this is to make sure we're doing a good job and explore alternatives and all the things. But unlike the other routine analysis, this report was a high-profile product ordered by the president. Oh, unlike routine analysis, the report was a high-profile product ordered by Obama, according to the authors of this report, directed by senior intelligence community agency heads, and created by just 5 CIA analysts using one principal drafter. That's all. It was a coup by those people right there, defined. Production of this report was subject to unusual directives from the president and senior political appointees, and particularly the director of the CIA. The draft was not properly coordinated within the CIA or the intelligence community, ensuring it would be published without any significant challenges to its conclusions. That paragraph is epic. The Tradecraft failures identified in this review are limited to sections of the report addressing Putin's intentions only. Because they did not follow standard procedures for this, they should not be seen as an indication of any other systemic problems with the rest of our agencies. The intelligence community assessment failed to acknowledge that the report was based on garbage information. The rules say you have to have good info. Now, accurate citation of raw intelligence reporting is critical to explaining to the reader whether the evidence is reliable. But the intelligence community disregarded these fundamental sections. They didn't even include those in the rubric, and they now claim that Putin intended for Trump to win without any supporting evidence. And Miss Thompson in 3rd grade would scold you for that. You know better than that. Put that in your essay, little Robbie. Key classified reports cited by the intelligence community in support of judgments that Putin developed a clear preference and aspired to help Trump contained flaws in terms of clarity or reliability. They just kind of made it sound like something it wasn't. The report omitted or obscured. Wow, look at that. That's like intentional obstruction, right? That's more maliciousness and intentionality there. We're just checking the boxes on these things. That the CIA's Directorate of Operations had properly added to raw human source reports, and thus they failed to warn the reader of the significant flaws in their sources. Continuing explaining that in response to the direction from the President Obama, the direction of the President Obama to make all information available, CIA officers said that the director of the CIA, John Brennan, Obama's hatchet man, ordered the publication in early December 2016 of 15 new or revised CIA human intelligence reports containing prior information on the Russians that they decided not to publish because they were terrible for various reasons having to do with Tradecraft standards. Now, most of the 15 were unremarkable, but they needed something. But 3 contained flawed information, and these 3 became the foundational sources that the Brennan-Obama coup co-conspiracy cabal cited to claim that Putin wanted Trump to win. So John Brennan ordered the CIA to go generate some reports that were terrible, 15 of them unremarkable, but the 3 that were literally flawed, that were flawed information. It's not right. They took it and added it as fact. Senior CIA officers said some of the information in these reports had been judged to have not met various long-standing intelligence community standards for publication, and that is why they had not been published in the first place. They were terrible. 2 sensitive reports were not published on the CIA's director's orders, okay? Brennan says, actually, don't publish those. Then maybe he said, actually go ahead and publish those. CIA officers also said that John Brennan personally directed that 2 of the most important reports not be formally disseminated when he first learned of them, ostensibly because they were too sensitive to even create printed copies. We were unable to obtain a convincing explanation, however, for why Brennan did this, since the CIA has a special reporting channel, it's called the Blank Series, whereby sensitive reports are restricted to only the president or as small as by name group as desired. You could still distribute the reports, like you're the CIA, CIA. Is this line secure? Yeah, go. Okay, right? Yeah, so what are you doing? So just send it by secure. So you don't have to say we can't send it because it's too sensitive to send. Experienced CIA officers noted that publishing a written report creates a formal record copy. That's the problem. Vetted by expert collection management officers and linguists. If you write it down, they look at it. Unclear or poorly sourced information would normally be removed or else explained in the context statement. Now, reading a published report ensures consistent message to all recipients, and by briefing the information orally, however, Brennan could have tailored his message to different officials, and he's completely unconstrained by a consistent record copy. The three reports became the foundational sources that led to their judgments against Trump. Now, on scant, clear, and unverifiable information, they relied on a fragment of a sentence, these maniacs, from a single human intelligence report published under Brennan's order, and that was the only classified information that they cited, okay? Totally just terrible. The ICA did not cite any report where Putin directly indicated helping Trump win was the objective, because there wasn't one. That judgment rested on a questionable interpretation of one unclear fragment of a sentence. Here it is. The unclear fragment is shown in bold, is part of a sentence in something that reads this, something redacted. So it's probably like someone said this to someone in an email from this source to this source. Putin had made this decision to leak the DNC emails after he had come to believe that the Democratic nominee had better odds of winning the election, and that Trump, whose victory Putin was counting on, most likely would not be able to pull off a convincing victory. A senior operations officer said of the fragment, "We don't know what was meant by that." Exactly right? 5 people read it 5 ways, as we just read there. What does that mean exactly? Now, the significance of this fragment cannot be overstated. Okay, they took that and they ran. The major high confidence judgment of this report rests on one opinion about a text fragment with uncertain meaning that may be a garble, don't even know, and for which it is not clear how it was even obtained. This text, which would not have been published without Brennan's orders, we've never seen it, is cited using only one interpretation of its meaning and without considering alternative interpretations, because they wanted one interpretation to matter. Continuing, saying the report containing the fragment where it came from did not directly say or imply even that Putin developed a preference for Trump. It wasn't even in there. Nor did it say that Putin ordered his intelligence services to assist Trump's chances of victory. In fact, the report presented only one interpretation of the unclear fragment, and they do so without following the proper reports and the guidelines. In fact, you have to properly distinguish when you're incorporating these things about assumptions and judgments, and you got to put a bunch of caveats in there. You can't say it's fact without also offering alternative assessments. That's the job. Now, this intelligence, though, does not address the source's motivations. They should have addressed that, right? If you're going to fill out the rubric for your intelligence report, John, you got to include source motivations in your analysis. But they didn't do that, which were part driven, they say, by a strong dislike for Putin and his regime, and the source also had an anti-Trump bias. You're kidding me. According to CIA officers. So they go to somebody like Putin supporting Trump from somebody who hates Trump. John Brennan takes it. He's like, yes, sounds pretty good to me. The report's judgment on Putin's thoughts about helping Trump does not stand if the single interpretation of the fragment is wrong. So the conclusion is based on one terrible, it's like on one leg of the stool. Because there is no other intelligence that corroborates it, and in any case, any other intelligence that is viable, perhaps more likely, alternative interpretations of the fragment actually exist. And none of the confirmed Russian activities, leaks, public statements, social media messaging, traditional propaganda corroborate this interpretation of the fragment. Nothing else supports it, because these activities were all consistent with Putin's objectives, which was undermine faith in democracy. There was no love of Trump's fate until they had to make it up. But what happened was John Brennan led this. In fact, he overruled John Brennan, more indicia of criminality and sedition, overruled CIA professionals to publish and cite the ambiguous fragment, saying, here, experienced CIA officers responsible for the reporting, they evaluate the raw intelligence. They say, well, who is this guy? Where did he come from? What did he say? And they ensure that human intelligence reporting meets the threshold for publication. They initially omitted the confusing fragment from the first version of the report. They said, no, we can't vet that. We can't validate any of that. So we're going to leave it out. But then John Brennan came in, overruled them, said, actually, I know better than you. I want that fragment in there because we want to cite it in our scam. A senior CIA operations officer described concerns about that, saying it was unclear reporting, saying the only evidence for this significant judgment, kind of a big thing to say, that Putin aspired to help Trump, no evidence in there. The officer explained that while most of the ICA was well done, ideally they should have eliminated the political judgment. acknowledgement, because there's no basis for that. Because the fragment lacked the clarity that was needed, overruled other people who had proper standards in the CIA. That same officer said that together with another senior colleague, 2 officers told John Brennan, "We don't have direct information that Putin wanted to get Trump elected." Okay, Tulsi Gabbard didn't write this report. This was delivered to Congress, and they did nothing about it and said, well, it's all valid to us. And therefore, the judgment that Putin was counting on Trump's victory should have been removed. They said that. We've got no evidence. They said, shut your mouths. We're publishing it. Now, the text failed to acknowledge the ambiguity of the fragment. Didn't express any of the uncertainties. Okay, the rubric was bad. They used an abbreviated description of the source without further mention of the problem, and it misleads the reader. It fails to explain the misgivings of the CIA professionals who got the information about the lack of clarity on the fragment. So the guy who gave you the document is like, this is terrible, but here it is. And they didn't even use it. And possibility of other interpretations, and the fragment doesn't even actually say anything about Putin aspired to help Trump. We don't even know what the information was even acquired. The ICA text said, "We assess the influence campaign aspired to help Trump's chances of victory when possible." They say it's supported by using an abbreviated source description, and the established source with secondhand access reported that Putin was counting on the president's victory. But this citation leaves out clear and important context flags from the raw intelligence report. In fact, the context warning says the identified subsource of paragraphs 2 and 3 had authoritative insight into this redacted, but the exact circumstances which the subsource obtained the information on Putin's plans were not explicitly clear. Ironically, the same embassy cable quotes others saying, "We don't feel any euphoria," citing a bipartisan anti-Russian consensus which directly contradicts the ICA judgment that the Russians preferred Trump. The same embassy cable quotes that contradicts that they preferred Trump. Now, the ICA also excluded significant intelligence. They just left it out. They selectively omitted quotes from key reports that contradicted the judgments on Putin's intentions, while conversely, they included quotes from those same reports that supported the thesis. They are so dishonest, man. This was done multiple times to include citations to 2 foundational sources for the ICA, so they're only telling one half of the story. This cherry picking, exactly, of reports is an important indicator for evaluating Tradecraft. So when they're reviewing your homework, they say, did you cherry pick anything? It's like an F. It's like a failure. Don't do that. By selectively quoting the report repeatedly, the authors both demonstrated their regard for the value of the source while simultaneously providing evidence of disregard for criteria on objectivity and consideration of contrary information from the same report. Totally dishonest. Now, the ICA selectively quoted a report as well. Missing from their report was significant intelligence that this happened. A longtime Putin confidant told a sensitive contact, told him this: Putin said he didn't care who won. Putin had outlined the weaknesses of both of them. Putin asserted that Russia was strategically placed to outmaneuver either one. Now, Putin's ambivalence about the 2 candidates is also further supported, and that was omitted as well because it didn't serve their narrative. In fact, redacted. Putin's friend made no positive mention of Trump at all. Instead, it revealed his pessimism that neither Trump or Clinton would be able to fix this relationship, and although he indicated that there could be more opportunities to improve relations, he said he didn't have a preference for either candidate. Left that out. And reinforcing his ambivalence was another statement, noting that regardless of the outcome, they could gradually rid the bilateral dialogue of irritants. Interesting sentence. This theme was echoed by someone else redacted, who noted that regardless of who wins, Russia will be able to begin a fresh dialogue with whoever wins. A Russian someone else also said that Russia was actually planning for Clinton victory. They knew where she stood, despite the media stories. They knew that they could work with her. Yeah, I mean, they gave him a bunch of uranium, I remember. But none of that was reported. And so a preoccupation of Russian officials and analysts was that neither Trump or Clinton would respect Russia, and it doesn't matter, regardless of party affiliations. Now, they also omitted reliable evidence that Putin's advisors saw significant downsides to the Trump presidency. If he wins, this is not going to be good for us. They were talking a lot about that. So that would support the idea that they'd want Hillary to win. The significance of that omission becomes apparent when reading the judgment of what Russian officials thought, which they said pushed for a clear preference for Trump, which is not true because that's what they wrote. Judgment that was directly contradicted by raw reports cited by the intelligence community as Russian views. They said, well, to support this judgment, Putin and his advisors developed a clear preference for Trump. Liars. In late so-and-so, someone prepared an analysis for Russia's senior-most American experts, and he said that Putin was talking positively about Trump's business capabilities and that the presence of advisors viewed that as positive towards Russia's interests. And that was their basis for Putin supported Trump. Now, at a June 2016 Moscow conference, Putin and 2 prominent Russian experts, head of US Canada, this guy and some other guy, gave speeches about about this, and instead they focused on the pros of the Russian attitudes towards Trump. And they were using Putin's speeches to kind of paper the file. But by omitting the below evidence, they denied the reader access to significant intelligence judgments, saying that Trump would probably be anti-Russian, and that it would be a dead end in Congress, and that Russian leaders took exception to, quote, having a favorable view of Trump. Like, no, we don't. They noted that Putin said, apparently, Trump is unlikely to be able to take steps to correct relations. So why would they want him if it's going to continue to be a problem? And we continue. They write, voluminous and likely relevant evidence was also excluded from information. They said that we're in possession of additional cyber-enabled collection and exfiltrated information from U.S. government. To date, we have not reviewed this data. Okay, so they've got a bunch of other evidence. The intelligence consisted of cyber data exfiltrated by the Russians from computer systems at these locations, including political groups and think tanks. But we don't know why this evidence was not reviewed. They didn't tell us. Probably like those thumb drives we talked about yesterday. A senior FBI analyst told investigators that there were many victims in these Russian hacks, that a lot of this should have been shared because it might have clarified the scope of Moscow, but they probably didn't want to look into it because it wouldn't have served them. Instead, John Brennan had to go make it up. The analyst explained that the Obama administration denied the intelligence drafters access to this intelligence on grounds of executive or congressional privilege. So a lot of the leaked emails, Obama and the Hillary people are saying you can't look at them. And if they did, they'd see some more problems that probably would show that Russia would have a much better time with Hillary than Trump. They also disregarded Russian behavior. In fact, the GRU warned Putin in early September that Trump would lose the election without the intervention of remarkable derogatory information on Clinton. Okay, so unless you nuke Clinton now, Trump's going to lose. So Putin had an opportunity. As the election entered the decisive final stages, Putin possessed proven low-risk cutout platforms for leaking documents. He could have leaked it via DC Leaks, WikiLeaks, Guccifer 2.0. They had an arsenal of material on Clinton. The SVR held that particularly damaging information that would have created greater scandals than material leaked already by the GRU was not leaked. CIA analysts confirmed that Moscow was receiving reports of U.S. election polling. They knew what was going on. Clinton had a strong lead. It gradually started to fall. The lowest point came 5 days before the election. Her lead was down to just 1.3. During those decisive final weeks, new scandals might have been expected to take a good chance of sinking her. Here were the polls. Remember that? Look at that. Clinton, 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 Clinton. Didn't work out. Putin's decision not to leak additional information as the polls narrowed undermines the claim that he ever tried or aspired to help Trump. If he wanted to do that, he could have just hit Hillary, and he didn't. Now, Putin's decision to stop leaking is consistent with alternative explanations that were omitted by the intelligence community that Putin didn't care who won. He saw weaknesses for Russia with both candidates. But the intelligence report glossed over more significant material, including the fact that Putin was holding this back. They said Moscow had additional information that it could have used based on these reports, but we assessed that Moscow refrained from this because it could have taken to effect this. We judged that they could have disclosed additional material and just kind of skip over it. They say their generic description, just like Putin had some additional stuff but held that back, makes the reader unaware of the significant information. Okay, there's a lot. They had the goods on her, and it violates directives. They also didn't address the possibility that even setting aside some of this materials, Russians also knew that Hillary was psychologically demented. The FBI had information from somebody that pointed out the possibility that Putin had reasons to want Hillary to win because he knew where she stood and could work with her. And yeah, says Russia's operation appeared to prioritize post-election influence rather than pre-election influence. Okay, so any Russian activity was like, oh, dang, Trump won? All right, so better figure this one out. And that was all omitted. It's more evidence that Putin's priorities were not focused on election operations that were designed to help Trump win at all. Rather, it was on post-election operations that were trying to undermine the credibility of the election. The report directs the analysis of alternatives and said this could have been another possibility. He didn't really care who won. After it was over, he was going to try to meddle and undermine it. In early August, someone said this, reviewed ongoing leaks of Clinton materials and a bunch of redacted materials here. The ICA timeline of Russian operations shows the last dump of emails began on October 7th, when WikiLeaks started leaking the Clinton campaign manager's emails here. Now, the timing and the context of these discussions addressing possession and leaking of emails suggest that this was deliberately laying low, and there was unspecified material they were planning to shoot out after the election right when Hillary was setting up, but it didn't work out that way for them. Now, no one specifies which candidate was expected they were going to attack or whatever, but sounds like it was probably Hillary. The strategic plan would only work if it's Hillary, because that's the material they have on her, and they didn't dump it on her because they wanted her to win. Now, while the ICA only considered the one hypothesis that he aspired to help Trump, the alternative hypothesis that Hillary was not considered at all. He had a lot of reasons. Timing suggests the effects of operations were intended to occur after the election was over, from a lot of the reports. In these assessments, they instructed regional directorates to conduct information operations to disseminate negative news stories on Clinton, but after the election. And the allegations included information about how she's coarse with partners and she's an idiot with her little red button thing. The media influence themes mirror the contents, and this could have been a problem for her, but they didn't do anything. And the timing and the targets did not make sense. If Putin's intent was to ensure Trump won, he should have launched these operations, and he didn't. Had Clinton been elected, these would have helped Russia undermine NATO perceptions of her competence as president. They would have provided rich propaganda opportunities for Moscow to say, you just elected another invalid. And if Putin preferred Trump to win, then we also would have expected to see evidence of that from a lot of other people, but we didn't. The available intelligence actually showed no Putin orders directed or suggested operations intending to elect Trump. No observed Russian operations could only be explained of trying to elect Trump. Just didn't happen. And more, no evidence of attempts to transfer money, no discussions among subordinates or authorities or tactical operators suggesting they were attempting to help Trump win, no indications of orders to not engage in activities that would damage Trump, right? So like lay off of him. They even heard him. They released emails from Colin Powell, who a lot of people have reverence for whatever reason, and he was critical of Trump. The ICA offered no reliable intelligence that indicated or implied that Putin issued orders to conduct any influence operations to denigrate Clinton or to elect Trump, and any leak operations could be attributed to undermining democracy without regard for Trump, because irregardless is not a word. ICA claims that the judgment that Putin developed a clear preference for candidate Trump is confirmed in part by the public behavior of senior Russian officials and state-controlled media. Now, the ICA assumed, without citing any direct evidence, that the Russian-controlled media could only reflect wanting a Trump victory. And so their report says Putin and Russian media said that they prefer Trump, and Putin said that. Putin and Russia developed a clear preference for Trump. No, they didn't, you liars. And this was all directly contradicted. In fact, looking at the public statements by public officials in Russia, Moscow's public line can be shown to be exploiting Trump's outsider and underdog status rather than helping him win or publicizing his views. In fact, a positive portrayal of Trump would help Putin exploit him after his defeat as a martyr to the corrupt process, right? So in other words, Putin could say, we want Trump to lose, and then we'll make Trump the martyr. Say, yeah, he was the voice of the people and it got stolen from him and all that. Clinton, by contrast, would be presented as being unfairly won. They didn't even consider it. And there's more evidence that directly contradicts their so-called judgment. Following Trump's victory, they note that Russian media began to spin this, saying, wow, this is a popular indictment of U.S. policies and that our country's gone bankrupt. And although they failed to examine the alternative hypothesis for all of this efforts, they just called it Russian propaganda. And the Russians suddenly loved Trump because they wanted him to win. They omitted key intelligence that directly contradicted the claims that Putin loves Trump. In November, a Russian group organized a Trump is not my president rally in New York. So a bunch of Russians were mad and not actually supportive of the effort. Now, in finding number 8, as we come to near conclusion of this report, the ICA draft was unnecessarily rushed. They rammed it through, just like they rammed through the laptop cover-up letter through the CIA, where they drafted it and got it approved by their board. On December 6, 2016, almost a month after the election, the president, Barack Obama, ordered the directors of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA to review their work to date on Russia and to quickly procure a new report to include an unclassified version for release in early January. That is all according to CIA officers involved in the report, okay? Other CIA officers are witnesses. They talked to this dude, or whoever wrote this report, and explained it. They said, Obama ordered us to do it. I want an unclassified report on my desk, include all the other crap that you thought was irrelevant, because I want to make it look bad for this dude. So get it to me. They all said, what? The ICA classified and unclassified versions were then disseminated on January 5th and January 6th. The real coup. The real January 6th was this fake coup attempt on that date. Man, the symbolism is just unnerving. 2 weeks before the inauguration of Trump, suggesting the rushed work schedule was driven by a political motivation to ensure that this was rolled out to Congress and the world by the outgoing administration, maybe even if they could get it out in time to undermine the counting of the electoral votes. By finishing the ICA before the new president was inaugurated, the outgoing director Brennan retained total control over who could see the raw intelligence, and he hid it, even from Congress, who was allowed to review the draft and what comments would be accepted or rejected. Senior, experienced CIA officers knew what the standard of care was and knew that he was falling below it, objected. The intelligence doesn't support your judgment at all, saying that Trump had Putin aspiring that he would win. Those officers might have had their voices heard if their publication was delayed until after the inauguration, and the new director could have come in and and assessed it. But rushing the publication also allowed the outgoing Brennan to lead the briefings to Congress, and he controlled the narrative. He's a key co-conspirator. Now, rushing the analytic process is sometimes necessary, but that did not appear to be the case here. A comprehensive and authoritative review of Russian activities for lessons learned could have been done at a deliberate pace and include a second review by other analysts. The election had passed, and with it, the need for current intelligence update of the sort produced by the fusion cell. But they didn't want to accept the outcomes of the election, right? This was their opportunity to try to seed a reversal of it, saying that Putin stole it. Glaring tradecraft errors identified in this investigation might have been caught and corrected by a more unpressured drafting process, and maybe one with less criminals. Most of the ICA's key points on Russian hacking, except for the Putin assessment, had already been disseminated. Nobody needed to know any of this. Russian hacking had already been covered extensively in the media since June. Now, the Congressional Intelligence Committee were given classified, maybe House and Senate, in September and December on Russian election interference. They already knew, primarily covering the hacking and leaking of emails, and Putin's objective about the real objective, which is just to undermine American elections. The judgment that Putin aspired to help Trump was not formally briefed to members until after the publication of the new fake report. The allegation that Putin preferred Trump was only published in one close hold President's Daily Brief article on August 2nd, 2016. In August and September, Brennan also gave oral briefings conducted separately to 8 senior congressional leaders using sensitive reporting, but with no written product. Okay, so Brennan goes around, tells everybody what they want to hear, and it was not possible to determine if they got the same details. Virtually all significant classified reports cited by the report had been collected prior to the election, and the paltry new intelligence that they cited from those reports did not justify rushing the product. There's not like any new smoking gun that just dropped. CIA officers commented, the process for reviewing this was complicated, and it was rushed. They used sensitive compartmented reporting. Few analysts could even access the whole thing, and by the order, and they were also producing an unclassified version. Together, these factors created disincentives against objecting to misquoting of sources or to challenging questionable reasoning. Just 5 CIA analysts were directed by John Brennan to write the report. Who were they? With one analyst doing most of it. Who was it? Only 3 of the analysts had been cleared into the compartmented materials in the 4 months since the director's fusion cell was established. The 5 authors would later express their astonishment to the committee that management made no significant changes to their draft during the review process, something unheard of for such a high-profile paper. Some reviewers said they only saw select segments that they were cleared for, and so I don't even know how it fits. Like, I can only see that paragraph versus that paragraph. One key CIA analytic manager was unaware of the concerns regarding that one sentence fragment that was totally made up that played such a significant role in the judgments of Putin's intentions. After reviewing the critical report, the manager admitted to not having been read on to the various compartmented materials until December 19th, 3 days before the final product went out, and that the officer had thus not even read the raw reporting, just shoved it in at the last minute. A senior operational manager said that they did not see the draft until days before it was published, when they voiced objections about some judgments to Brennan. It was in the context of this fast approaching deadline, rush to get this done, don't make any changes. Here's more of the timeline. Trump wins. December 5th, the House Intelligence Committee gets the first post-election intelligence briefing. No mention of Putin aspiring anything. Then December 6th, Obama orders a rewrite of the assessment. They've got that on the 6th. The president directed the intelligence community. Obama directed the intelligence community to update your work on the Russian influence. Quickly get me a new release for early January before Trump takes office, because we can stop him. The ICA would rehash much of it, but it would also include the judgment of an aspiration for Trump. 5 CIA analysts wrote it, and it got to Brennan by December 22nd. The authors would later say, I can't believe he didn't change anything. It was a terrible report. We had no idea what we're doing. Nobody saw anything, and they just used it. Acting on President Obama's orders, on December 9th, Brennan directed a full review and publication of raw human intelligence information that had been collected before the election of all the fake stories. CIA officers said that some of this information had been held on the orders of Brennan. Brennan's like, don't use that. Okay, now use that. While other reporting had been judged by experienced officers to not have met the long-standing publication standards. Some of the latter was unclear from the unknown subsources and would nonetheless be published after the election, but none of it supports the claim of Putin's aspiration. So then on January 6, 2017, the date of the real insurrection by the coosters called Obama, treasonous sedition conspirators, says the ICA is officially launched. On January 5th, the most sensitive classified version was briefed to Obama and shared with 250 people in the administration. Then on January 6th, they gave it to Trump, and the unclassified version was posted on the website. The unclassified key judgments were identical to the classified versions. They said Putin developed a clear preference for Trump and aspired to help Trump by discrediting Secretary Clinton. So there better be consequences for this. We hope that they will be coming soon. And we got more reaction on this from some senators. And so Tulsi Gabbard was also responding to some of this. Here's a little bit more from her press briefing today.
The Intelligence Committee's oversight report reveals that CIA Director Brennan overruled senior CIA officers who challenged the Obama-ordered intelligence assessment, stating, quote, "We don't have direct information that Putin wanted to get Trump elected." Yet, the Obama-directed assessment was published on January 6, 2017, which explicitly stated, quote, "We assess Putin and the Russian government aspired to help President-elect Trump's election chances, when possible, by discrediting Secretary Clinton and publicly contrasting her unfavorably to him," end of quote. The CIA and FBI, then led by John Brennan and James Comey, expressed high confidence in this judgment, while the NSA expressed moderate confidence. Yet, as the report we released today shows, the ICA, the Intelligence Community Assessment, did not cite any report where Putin indicated helping Trump win was an objective.
All made
the
up.
opposite is true. With regards to the Steele dossier, we now know that one of the source documents that the Obama administration used in the creation of this intelligence assessment in January of 2017 was none other than the discredited, unverified Steele dossier. The House Intel report states, quote, "Contradicting public claims by then CIA Director Brennan that the dossier was not in any way incorporated into this intelligence assessment."
Liar!
The dossier was referenced in the intelligence assessment's main body text and further detailed in a 2-page assessment annex.
All right, they're all getting called out by name. They all manipulated their positions of power. They all abused their office. They all did it to try to stop an incoming president from exercising the full power of his office and maybe not even get into office. The thesis was they're going to release this report. Media is going to hyperventilate. There'll be some demand for a new election or recounting of the electoral votes or invalidate it in some way. And then they can continue to install Hillary, who everyone thought was going to win, and she got stolen out from under her. We know what they tried to do. Tulsi Gabbard explaining a criminal referral now going over to the DOJ, and it includes Obama. And so we're going to keep our eye on this one, my friends. Thank you for subscribing and joining as we do. Thanks for sharing this video so people can take a look at what is inside this disgusting report and just how corrupt the Democratic Party is, starting at the top with Barack Obama.